The civil liberties of foreigners coming into the United States, that should be something that's completely inconsequential, being that they're not citizens. And yet it was groups that were concerned about the civil liberties of these particular individuals, Mr. Haney, more so over American citizens. This ultimately led to your work being shut down.
Yes, that's correct. In fact, it was the Department of Homeland Security Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, in conjunction with the Department of State, that put pressure on the National Targeting Center to close down the case that I was involved with.
And you had been investigating for a year, particularly the area around San Bernardino, the Riverside Mosque. Give me a little insight into what you were doing at the time when you got the visit saying, no, it's offensive, you got to stop.
Well, that would have been in March of 2012, when 7 lawyers and 3 top officials from the State Department came to the targeting center and expressed their concerns that we were focusing on in a particular group called Tablighi Jamaat.
Wow. And this, I mean, and you were there because obviously there's a difference between, racial or ethnic profiling and criminal profiling. There's a huge difference. And obviously you were looking in behavior that was sort of setting up some red flags for you, not what they were accusing you of.
Well, we had a strong law enforcement case that generated 1,200 actions, including visa revocation, denial of entry into the country, cancellation of visa waiver, the things you've been hearing a lot about in the news lately. That was one of the major components of our case.
Wow. And of course, one of the stories that's related to this is this 21-page file that they released on Tashin Malik, and it was just basically kind of haphazardly pushed together. It kind of amazes me just the lack of information that was in this file. I was looking over this, and this is exactly what you're pointing out, that they just seemed so quick to approve of things like this.
Well, we call it connecting the dots. We've heard a lot about it, the pings and the dots over the years. Well, our job in the National Targeting Center across all of CBP, Customs and Border Protection, was to find those dots and link them into a coherent picture. We call it a case. And we build from the bottom up. We start with the place where people are born, their family members, their date of birth, their clubs, schools, associations, and we build a foundation. I understand that they never did have the correct address of Tashin Malik. That would have been a first and fundamental piece of information that we would have used in the case that I worked on at the NTC.
At the time when, and I mean clearly you thought that it was wrong for them to have shut this down. I mean, were you concerned? What were your thoughts when you got that visit and they said you have to cease this investigation?
Well, what really brought it all home was when the details of the San Bernardino shooting began to emerge, and it was mentioned that Syed had attended the Darul al-Islamiyya Mosque in San Bernardino. That was exactly one of the groups, affiliated groups across the country that was in our investigation. That and the Al-Huda school that she ostensibly attended. Both of those organizations and their network was in the case that I worked on at NTC. So I knew immediately there was a connection.
And you felt that had your investigation, if that had been allowed to go through, if it had been allowed to be completed, do you think that you would have uncovered enough that you could have perhaps prevented this?
The linking piece would have been individuals who transited through that mosque that were already in the case in the year 2012. So if I had stayed engaged in the case, I would have continued adding subsequent pieces. And then 2 plausible outcomes would have resulted. Either Syed Farouk would have been put on the no-fly list and never traveled, and or his pending fiancée would have been denied a K-1 visa simply because of her association with an individual who was linked to one of these mosques here in the United States. That's a law enforcement case.
Right. It is incredibly troubling because this is just one particular case about which we know. This is one investigation that we know about. I mean, are there other instances like yours where there have been investigations that have not been allowed to go through because of political correctness, because of they're worried about civil liberties?
Well, what I'd rather speak to is the headlines this morning that we have 10,000 individuals in the country whose visas were retroactively canceled,
right,
because of potential links to terrorism, Islamic terrorism, and now we don't know where they are. I would say that proves my case beyond doubt.